I want to thank the chairwoman for holding this important and timely meeting here today, hearing. I echo the concerns of my colleagues. The types of deceptive online practices that have been discussed today are deeply troubling. I've continually stressed that a top priority for Congress should be securing our U.S. elections. We could see dangerous consequences if the right tools are not in place to prevent the spread of misinformation online. This is a national security concern. As a former law enforcement officer, I understand that laws can be meaningless if they are not enforced. I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses about the FTC's capabilities and resources to combat these deceptive online practices. Dr. Donovan, in your testimony, you say that regulatory guardrails are needed to protect users from being misled online. I share your concerns about deception and manipulation online, including the rise in use of the dark patterns, deep fakes, and other kinds of bad practices that can harm consumers. Can you explain in more detail what sort of regulatory guardrails are necessary to prevent these instances?
I'll go into one very briefly. One of the big questions is, if I post something online, that's not an advertisement. It's not, I'm just trying to inform my known networks. The problem isn't necessarily always just that there's a piece of fake content out there. The real problem is the scale, being able to reach millions, right? In 2010, 2011, we lauded that as a virtue of platforms. It really emboldened many of our important social movements and raised some incredibly important issues. But that wasn't false information. It wasn't meant to deceive people. It wasn't meant to siphon money out of other groups. At that time, too, you weren't really able to scale donations. You weren't really, it was much harder to create networks of fake accounts and pretend to be an entire constituency. And so when I talk about regulatory guardrails, we have to think about distribution differently than we think about the content. And then we can also assuage some of the fears that we have about freedom of expression by looking at what are the mechanisms by which people can break out of their known networks. Is it advertising? Is it the use of fake accounts? How are people going viral? How are posts going viral, information going viral? The other thing I'd like to know from the government perspective is, does the FTC have enough insight into platforms to monitor that, to understand that? And if they don't know why and how tens of millions of dollars are being siphoned out of Trump's campaign, then that's also another problem. And we have to think about, what is transparency, what does auditing look like in a very meaningful way.
Doctor, do you believe then that the FTC has the adequate authority under Section 5 of the FTC Act to take action against individuals and companies engaged in deceptive behavior practices online? And I do want to point out a Wall Street Journal a report that said of the millions of dollars, 200 and some million dollars of fines, that they've only collected about $7,000 since 2015.
Wow.
So,
I think that you do have to look a lot closer at what the FTC has access to and how they can make that information actionable. For example, proving that there's substantial injury, if only one group has access to the known costs or knows the enormity of a scam, then we have to be able to expedite the transfer of data and the investigation in such a way that we're not relying on journalists or researchers or civil society organizations to investigate. I think that the investigatory powers of the FTC have to also include assessing substantial injuries. Thanks.
thank you, Doctor. Mr. Harris, do you believe the agency has enough resources to responsibly, swiftly, and appropriately address the issues? And I just want to point out that we flatline them all the time. And on the other side, the industry continues to expand at exponential rates. And so I'd like to hear that.
That's the issue that you're pointing to, is that the problem-creating aspects of the technology industry, because they operate at exponential scales, create exponential, issues, harms, problems, scams, et cetera. And so how do you, have a small body reach such large capacities? I think this is why I'm thinking about how can we have a digital update for each of our different agencies who already have jurisdiction over whether it's public health or children or scams or deception, and just have them ask the questions that then are forced upon the technology companies to use their resources to calculate, report back, set the goals for what they're going to do in the next quarter.
Thank you,
to deal
Mr.
with it.
Harrison. I yield.